Hi, I'm Amy Rudersdorf. I'm a consultant with AVP. And I'm talking to you today about documenting your digital preservation program and the value and importance of doing so. So as I mentioned, I work for AVP, which is a data management and digital preservation solutions provider. We do consultancy and software development, and we offer proven approaches to help you protect, manage, and use the data and information assets you care about. So as consultants working in the field of digital preservation in particular, we see over and over again that organizations don't prioritize documentation. It's the thing that languishes in the digital preservation programs that we see. It either doesn't exist, exists only in draft form, or is extremely out of date. So let's talk about why digital preservation documentation is important and what you can do about it. So first of all, we need to talk about what documentation means. And this is a long list, and that's for a reason, because documentation can mean lots of things. At a high level, at an organizational level, we have administrative documents like mission statements, strategic plans, documentation of administrative decisions, contingency plans, etc. At the sort of day-to-day working level, we have documentation on workflows and procedures, processing manuals, collection inventories, analytics and logs, and then everything in between: staffing plans, organizational charts, definitions. All of these things fall into this category of documentation. And not everything here may be valuable to your organization, but many of these will be important in documenting the work you do now and into the future. I don't want to lie and say that everybody loves documentation, because clearly people don't. And that's proven here by this quote about the fact that this person in particular does not like writing documentation. So I think we can reflect that out to the community and recognize that this isn't the most fun part of your job. But you got to do it. And so I'm going to talk through some of the reasons why, and you can use these to motivate yourself, motivate your colleagues, and impress upon the need with your administration. So the first thing I want to mention is that documentation is important, not just to you and your organization, but to align with the standard. So ISO 16363 is the audit and certification of trustworthy digital repositories. This is TDR, as it's known as in short. This standard outlines 3 major areas of digital preservation, or what is required to have a trustworthy digital repository. Those include organizational infrastructure, digital object management, and technical infrastructure and security risk management. And there are 109 metrics in 16363. And so what I've done is reviewed them and found that documentation is required in all of these metrics represented by the numbers you see on the screen. So quite a number of them, about half of the metrics in 16363 require some sort of documentation. So if you were to, in the future, try to get certified as a TDR, you would need to have supporting documentation in these areas. Obviously, not everyone, and very few organizations, in fact, will go for certification. But if you wanted to align your program with the standard, these are the areas you'd want to focus on as far as documentation goes. So if we want to pull back a little bit and say, okay, TDR is a little much, then we can look at other best practices, guidelines, and assessments. So the first one I'll mention, which is sort of apropos where we are today, is the NDSA levels of digital preservation. And again, documentation is called out in this as well. So what I've done is broken out the different functional areas on the left and the level in which documentation is called out. So for example, in metadata, level 1 and 4 refer to the need for documentation. So if you want to align with any of these levels, all of these levels, you are going to need to have documentation that supports the findings in this particular guideline. One other example is from the DPC, Digital Preservation Coalition's Rapid Assessment Model, or RAM. And again, there are 12 sections in the DPC RAM, and of those, 6 require some sort of documentation. So you can see the list here of the 12: policy and framework, legal, continuous improvement, metadata management, content preservation, etc. These require some sort of drafted documentation to enable you to get scored in these areas. So the RAM is a scoring model to get a sense of your readiness, your digital preservation readiness. So the less documentation you have, the lower your score is going to be. And this is, you'll find this across the board. These are not the only two guidelines and assessments that require documentation as part of the package that you put together to be reviewed. But if you look at the NEDCC peer assessment, Core Trust Seal, Drambora, all of these require that you have documented your program. Okay, so we got the standard and the guidelines and best practices out of the way. And now let's talk about your boss, because your boss needs to know what's going on as well. And it's documentation that's going to enable you to help them understand. So first of all, as I said, they need to understand what you're doing and why. And they need to be able to intelligently and confidently support it. So you can go and talk to them all you want, but unless you put some papers in front of them, they're not going to be able to have the confidence to talk about what you do. So working with them to establish policies, to document in any way you can the program, that'll help you to get the support you need to do things like get more resources, get more staff, acquire new technology or greater amounts of technology. All of these things are going to be supported through the communications that you do in some sort of written form that are either approved by administration or reviewed by, and you've gotten some sort of sign off on it, ideally. In this case, you're probably looking at more high level documentation types as opposed to your day-to-day workflows and procedures. Now, your colleagues may be the opposite. They may need these workflow procedures and the like. But they also are going to want to know at a high level what you do and why you do what you do and why you need resources too. So this is particularly important for colleagues in other departments where you may all kind of be vying for the same resources. And if they understand a little bit more about what you do and why, they may be more supportive of you as you try to increase the resources that so that you're getting the support you need for your department. It's also important so that everyone understands roles and responsibilities, and this really helps to avoid problems stemming from ambiguity around who's responsible for what. Just make it clear, write it down, slap it on a board, do something like that, document decisions. And then documentation is also going to be important to you, believe it or not. And here's why. So first of all, you want to be able to know how to perform tasks so they're done the same way every time. So this is going to be important to you as someone who's performing these tasks, but also for you so that your colleagues are performing the tasks the same way all the time. I don't know about you, but I have a terrible memory. So if you want to remember what decisions you made about how to perform your work, writing them down is a great way to do it. And also it ensures that, again, others see what you've done and can mimic it without having to hassle you, right? Because you've got this written down already. They should be able to step up and do the work. The other important part of this is making sure that you do all the things you're supposed to do. So if you overlook important steps in your workflow, it means that some data is handled one way, other data is handled another way, and now you have inconsistencies in your program. That's not good. And then finally, this is, the classic one. If you leave your job, others need to know what you did and can continue this work. And I think this is really important in digital preservation because we're not talking about 5 years or 10 years. I mean, ultimately, we're talking about forever. And we can put forever in quotes. But the reality is you're not going to be at this job forever. And that data is. And so you need to be able to hand it off in a seamless way so that that data gets the same sort of support it needs over time. And so it's a big responsibility and you need to be prepared to hand that off when the time comes. And then of course there's the data. Digital preservation is forever and needs to be auditable and accessible over time. Without proper documentation, that becomes impossible, which could put your data at risk. So here are some friendly tips for documentation success. First of all, when you're writing documentation of any sort, when you're writing anything at all, right? Be clear and concise. Keep it short and make it as clear as possible, especially if you're writing workflow and procedures documentation. Embrace the screenshot. Everybody likes visible or visuals to go along with the long descriptive text that you're going to keep clear and concise. So include those. Know your audience. Obviously, if you're writing a mission statement, that's going to be completely different than if you're writing documentation to support student work. Enlist an editor. Everybody needs an editor. Editors need editors. If you're writing something, make sure somebody else can have a look at it. If not only to make sure that your grammar is correct, but also to make sure that your meaning is coming across the way you want it to. I say embrace the bullet point, and that's in part because in this day and age, we just don't have a lot of time to read. And so when it comes to something like this, documentation or technical writing, the more, again, concise you can be, the more clear you can be, the better off everybody's going to be. And so bullet points really help to organize information in a way that is easily digestible. And so I strongly recommend you embrace them. Another good tip is to write as you work. So if you're performing a workflow or you're actually going through some procedures, write as you work, and you'll find that you'll run into the bugs that you run into or the little niggling things that bother you that you want to fix. And if you're writing your documentation as you go, you can kind of sort those things out and either document them or work through the problem so you don't have to document that. Keep your goal in mind. Scope, don't let scope creep. If you're writing procedures for one function, keep those procedures clean of other functions, if that makes sense. And then finally, track your versions. So in short, documentation is a love letter you write to your future self, and your future self will be very, very happy that you'll have done it. So make your future self happy and write that documentation. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions.